Hello, and welcome to I Am Dad podcast with your fatherhood authority, Kenneth Braswell. 30 minutes of wisdom, information, resources, and nuggets on your fatherhood journey. Or maybe you're just curious and want to hear some real talk about fatherhood, family, and the minds of men. Well, guess what? We got you too. Sit back, grab your pad and pen, and maybe even bring a little something to sip on. Enjoy 30 straight minutes of fatherhood, family, and fun with the Fatherhood Authority, Kenneth Braswell.
Welcome to another insightful episode of I Am Dad podcast. Today we are honored to have with us Dr. Alan Michael Graves, a dedicated advocate for fatherhood engagement and a leader in the field of human services. As the Senior Director of Teaching and Capacity Building at the Good Plus Foundation, Dr. Graves is at the forefront of developing programs and advocating for policy changes that support fathers and strengthen families. With over 20 years of experience in both public and private sectors, Dr. Graves has brought his expertise in program development, family partnerships, and interagency systems of care to his work with organizations across the country. His commitment to addressing disparities within systems and his passion for fatherhood engagement has made him a key figure in driving meaningful change. As a parent himself, Dr. Graves draws from both his personal and professional experiences to positively impact children, families, and communities. We're thrilled to dive into his journey and hear his insights on the importance of fatherhood and all things fatherhood, because that's what we do here at I Am Dad podcast. Let's bring in our good friend, Dr. Alan Graves. How you doing, sir?
I'm well, sir. Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Man, it's a pleasure. So, we've been in this field. I don't even want to go back. Realized last night, I was trying to, in my mind, remember where's the first place I met you. That's how I go back. Whenever I interview people, it's like, I have to go back and figure out where did I have the first time I met? I said, it's probably at some conference somewhere, but I think it was in LA. It was
a long time ago.
Yeah. I think it was in LA. That's what I came up with. I said, I don't remember where in LA. I said, but I think it was LA. Listen, we start our podcast off with insightful, conversation and question that we get people to really kind of reveal a little bit about themselves so folks understand kind of where they come from and where they sit in this particular space. It's very simple. It is, tell me your daddy's story.
My daddy's story. My daddy's story is that I am 54 years old. I'm Dr. Alan Michael Graves. Had a really good life, but I'm still waiting for my daddy. Yeah, I had a mama who did the damn thing. My mama, superwoman. Love her to death. We are thick as thieves. But I'm very clear that the absence of my father and father figure has had a tremendous impact on me navigating my life. Whether it was through the military, through college, through my day-to-day work now, in the community with other fellas, right? The absence of a dad has had as a child and now as a grown man had an impact on me. And so my daddy journey is to help other people with their daddy journey.
That's great, man. I love that. It's something, I don't even know how I came about this question. I started thinking about it in the beginning and it's just become, but every time I ask the question and people answer it, it gives a different perspective. Someone said, yo, you got to do a book one of these days on the daddy stories you've heard from people, because there's so much in it. Like one of the things that I'm intrigued by, when I hear this particular story or an iteration of this particular story is the journey process, right? And so we don't think about, like, when people ask me like, yo, Kenny, how'd you get into this work? Like they think it was an academic journey that got me here. And I'm like, nah, it was life, bro. I was like, I have to really tell you part of my life for you to understand how I got here. Talk to me a little bit about how that journey was for you and what has inspired you to really dig down into the work around fathers.
So if I were to be perfectly honest with you, and I love the question, Kenny, I'm a mama's boy. There was some DV early on in my mother and father's relationship. And I started off with my journey with hatred towards my father for putting his hands on my mom for decades. Now, I had a very religious grandma who said, the Bible says you honor thy mother and father. So I've never disrespected him, never talked negative to him, neither has my mother. but I have some very negative, strong feelings toward him for what I have through my journey said was the DV. But what I realized, it wasn't really just the DV. The journey and the pain and the hurt is him. He wasn't at my Pop Warner football game. I was valedictorian. He wasn't on the stage when I came in. Don't get it twisted. My mama was there and she was loudest. She was rude. But I didn't have my daddy. I didn't get like some of my colleagues to run off the field when I scored a touchdown and jump in my daddy's arm. That's why I was really mad. I shouldn't say am really mad, right? So my journey is multifaceted. It has to do with my passion and my love for my mom. Now I tell people all the time, my mother has always told me, boy, let that stuff go. I'm the one he hit. Let it go. Make a relationship. So she's always advocated. But one of the things that we don't talk a lot about is the trauma and the impact. So I've had at 3, I remember the DV incident. There's some trauma that hadn't been resolved, which prevented me from having a relationship with my father, from reaching out to, because I've seen him. I see him at weddings, funerals, family engagements. And because my grandma said that you got to follow the Bible, I give him the, that's it. I ain't got nothing to say to you, bro. You put your hands on my mama. If I saw him today, that's exactly what would happen. Right? So my journey involves some healing for me. Right? So I'm here doing this fatherhood spells, helping other fathers and helping children, but simultaneously, I'm working on my own stuff too. I say almost everybody has, if you're doing this work, has a daddy's journey and a daddy's story. Because even if you had the perfect dad in the world, it affects how you engage fathers now, because you're now holding everybody up to your daddy's standard. Well, that don't work, right? So all of us need to be working on our own. That's why I said I love the question, our own daddy's story, while doing this work. And that's what fuels me, right? Because I have 3 boys, and I don't want them to have a negative daddy story.
Right. Yeah. And it's crazy because that's what's so intriguing about this, right? Is that, I often tell people I'm doing this thing. I'm writing my memoir now on the second half. I did my biography earlier on in my career, but now I'm writing the memoir of the last 20 years of my life in this work. And so one of the lines in a piece that I wrote about my father's death, talks about the struggle of being able to find forgiveness for him, but having to revisit my trauma every time I wake up in the morning and do this work, because it reminds me how I got here. And people don't take that into consideration, that you and I are out here trying to do this work and ensure that people don't go through the same traumas that we've gone through.
Absolutely.
But we have to reintroduce ourselves to our own trauma every time we stand in front of a father and we see something similar in them that we see in us. You and I share, some very similar things. I had the same issue with not my biological father, but my stepfather and DV. And I tell that story, all the time. It's like, listen, for those of you who are out here that think that, this work is only about empowering fathers and trying to get them into the spaces that we want to get them in, a lot of this stuff is about what we saw happen to our mothers, right?
Yes.
And that we want to, and in thinking about it, and to your point about, which is where I'm going now, when we become fathers, and you have girls, I'm thinking about, how do I equip my girls not to fall into those traps?
Yeah.
And for my boys, I'm trying to think about, how do I raise these boys to be the man that is deserving of the wife that he will desire at some point. Right. And so when you are thinking about your own fatherhood journey, talk to me a little bit about that, because there's got to be a lot of joy in that. But at the same time, you're walking this path of purpose to ensure that these boys turn out a certain way.
Yeah. Immediately I have 2 thoughts. The first is just having the conversations, right? Because forever I would have never told, because we got a little bougie family, Kenny, I would never tell the DV story, right? Because I need to be seen in this image. But what I realized, and especially because of my sons, that I need to have these conversations. They need to know about how I got where I'm at and and how I show up as a dad. and talk about because in our community, to be honest with you, I saw my uncles put their hands on their wives. It's what happened. You were expected to. If your old lady wasn't respecting you, that's what we used to call our
Right.
husbands, wives, girlfriend, old man, old lady. If your old lady wasn't doing what she was supposed to do, you were expected to put your hands on her. And if you didn't, you was the soft one, right? That's how I was raised, and I saw all the time. But now I have a different narrative to share with my sons, right? About respect, right? About keeping their hands to themselves, about communication, things that we weren't. So again, I don't finger point to people in the past. We just weren't given those tools. But now I think I'm a convener of those tools for the next generation, and not just the fathers that I work with, but my own children. You said even with the little girls. I have a 5-year-old little girl now, and I am scared as hell of her falling into a trap of dominance from a male, right? Especially having a strong daddy who, because I am a strong father, right? Not unfortunately, I'll just say I'm doing this journey without a mother for them, so I'm a single father, and I have to intentionally create balance, right? So I expose my daughter to strong Black women who are not doing that, right? As opposed to letting her emulate people who are. And I think we do that a lot in our culture. I purposely introduce my female friends that are strong, independent women who are God-fearing and also wives and understand their role as a wife. But I allow them into my daughter's life and my son's life, right? To let my sons know this is, everybody ain't like you. All the women ain't like the videos and what your friends say.
Absolutely.
In our community, we have some strong Black women who are not doing the things that TikTok says, right? So again, exposure and communication is where I show up today. And I gotta tell you, it's not easy. I'm competing with the world, right? I'm competing with TikTok. I'm competing with their friends. And I'm telling a different story than I think society is about, where the possibilities of them having healthy relationships. I tell people all the time, I don't have healthy relationships because I'm afraid that according to the statistics, I'm going to be a perpetrator.
Right.
There's a strong possibility. So I am in relationships where I avoid confrontation. If you and me, oh, you my girl, okay, you're going to get whatever you want because I don't want to have no fight because I'm afraid of being a perpetrator. Well, that's not healthy because I know relationships need healthy confrontation.
Absolutely.
You're supposed to argue. That way you get to make up, if you know what I mean. Right? Yeah. But if you're not having that, your relationship is missing something. So I've learned and am learning how to have healthy confrontation, right? How to argue healthy. Who taught us that?
Yeah, my wife taught me that early on in our marriage, and because I was the same way, I was like, "Listen, I ain't trying." Let me tell you, I said, "Let me make you clear. I ain't trying to have no drama. I've had enough drama in my life. I ain't trying to have no conflict. I would rather pick all my stuff up and leave, before I get into a relationship where it is just like constant drama." And she said to me one day, she was like, "How will our kids be able to understand how to navigate conflict if they never see it?"
That part.
And I was like, whoa, okay. Now it has to be healthy conflict. It can't be out of control conflict, because that was my definition of conflict. My definition of conflict was watching what my stepfather did to my mother. So I didn't see a variation of conflict. It was to the extreme. And so I never saw people like have conflict, might be mad for a couple days, and then the next thing you know, they hugged up in the kitchen. I didn't know what that process was,
Right.
but I had to walk through it and understand it. But I think the key thing for me was, um, whatever the conflict is, never allow it to be ending, meaning that this is where the relationship ends. This is not where it ends. This is where it begins to get better, because
Yeah.
you become better partners once you understand, how to navigate conflict. And I think my son, and my nephew who's now in my house, I got a 15 and 17-year-old boys in my house. All my girls are gone. And so, and that we both got boys. That's a whole nother show. We have to come
Whole
back
nother show.
and do that. So, Good Plus Foundation, man, tremendous, awesome work. We've crossed paths in a couple of different spaces. Got to figure out how to be a little more intentional on doing more.
Mhm.
Talk to me about that journey and talk to me about that work.
Sure. So I like to tell people, I started off in this fatherhood space on a fluke, right? There was a Black psychologist. We taught together at Cal State LA, and we would see each other in passing. And then I went to do some part-time work for an agency, and he happened to be the vice president in that agency. And out of the blue one day, he told me, he said, he was old school, "Come here, boy." I'm like,
Mm.
"Boy? Did he just call me boy?" Right? "Come here, boy." He said, "You're gonna work for me and you're gonna do some stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, whatever," right?
Mm.
2 days later, I was called into the CEO's office, offered an opportunity to work underneath. Actually, I wasn't offered, I was told, because he
Mm.
had some clout. "You're moving over to this Dr. Herschel Swinger. You're moving under Project Fatherhood," because I was coming from the training center. And he became my mentor. And I watched him and his passion for Black families. And I decided I want to follow in his footsteps. He was ill and he had a plan, right?
Mhm.
He had a succession plan, and without me knowing it, he began to mentor me to take his place.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what happened. I would go home after work and sit at his kitchen table at his house and listen to him tell stories about a Black father parenting, about father parenting, and I wanted to do something in that work. And then I was sent to a meeting around child welfare and the number of kids in child welfare from the community, and I started to bridge the two together. So in the work that I was doing at the Children's Institute, we were teaching parents great tools, but then we were releasing them out into systems that were not father friendly.
Right.
And Good Plus, who we happen to be a partner with, offered me a position to come work for them to continue to do that work for providing father with those great tools, but also to educate and work with systems, right?
Mhm.
And I was super excited about that, right? And so today at Good Plus, not only do we work with families across the country, because we have about 130 programs from New York to LA that we work with, community-based programs that we partner with. And for the majority, we provide them with goods. That's the goods in Good Plus,
Right.
right? Diapers, strollers, high chairs, car seats, breast pumps, wipes, anything that a family needs, we
Mhm.
provide it to the community-based organization to help them come out of poverty. But I'll tell you how we do it a little differently and why I was really excited about coming to the organization and how I've seen it grow and really impact families. We don't do it based on need. We do it based on bringing you out of poverty. So, Kenny,
Mm.
if you're in a fatherhood program, we're going to
Mhm.
give that program all those goods to give to you as an incentive to complete your program. So, if you're in 24/7 dads,
Mhm.
12, 13-week program, at week 7, you get a new car seat. At week 9, you get a crib or a pack and play, right? So, and it's not just giving you stuff, because if I just give you Pampers today, you're going to need them again tomorrow. But if,
Mhm.
if there's an incentive for you to do something to bring you out of your current position, we think that's different than the need-based donations. And don't get me wrong, there is a need for those organizations. We're just a different one. But
Mhm.
the plus part is where I really come in, because not only are we doing the goods, we're actually providing training, capacity building, and working on policy change towards stronger families. And at Good Plus, it's not just about dads, right? I remind people constantly, this is about families. I'm a
Mhm.
child advocate, and I work with dads to improve the outcomes of kids. So
Mhm.
that means I work a lot with moms too. People don't know that behind the scene. That's girl. I know he cheated. I know
Right.
he's a dog, but your children need their father. Let me tell you why, right? So we're working really from a family standpoint, and not from a finger pointing, wagging, y'all doing this wrong, but an education standpoint, right? I
Mhm.
tell people all the time right now, I'm tired of talking about the importance of fatherhood. And don't call me
Mhm.
to come speak because I can't. We've been
Mhm.
doing that for 20 years. I want to talk
Mhm.
about how to engage fathers because
Mhm.
as long as I've been doing it, it's still hard because
Mhm.
I'm engaging them in systems that are not father friendly. The
Mhm.
courts, the schools, those systems make the work hard. And so I don't want to put it on the fathers like they're hard to engage. No, it's hard engaging them in systems that are not father friendly. So at Good Plus, we're very intentional. We won't take on partnerships if you're not willing to work with the whole family and the whole
Mhm.
family meeting, including dad. So we're not a fatherhood program. We're a family program that has a strong emphasis on working with dads. I can
Wow.
go on all day, so I'll pause because you probably got some questions.
Yeah, no, not questions, just continuing the conversation.
Yeah.
You said something that I kind of like smiled when you said it because I had to come to an epiphany to think differently about it. Where you said, I'm tired of talking about the importance and essentialness of fathers. That it's kind of like I shouldn't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Here's what I learned. One of the things that is happening in the responsible fatherhood field is that the field continues to evolve. Where I learned it the most was in the child support space, particularly amongst 4D directors across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was learning was every time I would go to one of their conferences, whether it was RITSA or NCA or any of those conferences they would have over time, that the cohort of people who were in charge changed in upwards of 60 to 70%. So when you go back 4 years later, what you realize is that everyone you talked to
New.
before is gone.
Yeah.
So now I got to say it all over again for the people in the back that's now in the front.
Right.
This last summit was the same thing. Me and Patrick
Mm-hmm.
was having this conversation, and I was like, yo, I was like, remember when we used to walk into a room and we would know like 80, 90% in the room, like personally, like
Oh,
we
I
would
was
know
there.
them personally.
Yeah.
You remember that? We
Yeah.
walk in, it was like family reunion. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, this summit had 800 plus people over the 2.5 days. And I probably knew about 10 to 15% personally of the
Yeah.
people who were there.
Yeah.
And my mind was like, this is why I got to keep talking about the importance
Yeah.
until they understand it without me saying it. The reason that
Yeah.
they're coming here is because they don't understand it. And they have to go back and convince people that they work with that this is important enough for them to work on. And I was like, I got to talk more about that because I think like folks like us that's been here for a while, we want to move on. We like let's get to the meat. Let's get to. But I think for me, it is now I just got to have both conversations. I can't
I
just
was just getting ready to say it's a both
yeah
and,
yeah
right?
yeah yeah.
Yeah, it's a both
hmm
and. Yeah, because
Because
I too think that there's still a value of highlighting the importance, right?
hmm
What a father brings to the life, the outcomes of the kids, all that is extremely necessary.
hmm
But I find that if you let, and this is just me personally, if I let people ask me to come be a speaker, and the only thing I'm talking about is the importance and the stats, and then I never get to the good part, right? Which
right
to me is this is how you do it, right? So when I say I don't want to talk about it, it still needs to be done, but maybe it needs to be done by in another lane because I want to come in pick it after. I want to come in after you've realized the importance, and then talk about how to do it, right?
yeah yeah yeah
So
yeah
I'm not. I'm glad you clarified that because I'm not saying we don't have to talk about the importance.
right.
It's just I intentionally don't want to get stuck there.
Right. But now you're in this space where I think is you guys, your sweet spot, which is this policy space, right?
Yes.
And the infrastructure of the field itself. I've been spending a lot of time thinking about the infrastructure of the
Mhm.
field and what are the building blocks to ensure that when you and I go off to take care of our grandkids, and live on the beach and have fun, that the infrastructure of this work is still solid and is moving forward, even when champions become removed from the space, that new champions are
Yeah.
created because people are sitting at their feet and they're being inspired and they're wanting to do this work, but they're wanting to do it in the right way for the right reasons, right? There's this other conversation that I'm trying to figure out how to get into this space and talking about, and it is what I'm describing, the business of fatherhood. Like the business of fatherhood is just as important as the work of fatherhood,
Mm-hmm.
because if the business, organization, infrastructure, whatever is not in place, you have no shot at sustainability of or longevity, right?
Yes.
Or scaling, right? And so, which is concerning to me right now because I'm
Mm-hmm.
not seeing a lot of that moving forward. Is, to your point, I love the or and this is an and, right? So the and is building that infrastructure so that there are organizations who are primarily focused on fatherhood engagement with the goal of improving child outcomes at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. But the second part of it is, how do we strengthen the traditional human services field so that it becomes more integrated, so that we don't have to do the separate, so it could be an and, not an
Mm-hmm.
or. It's not an
Right.
or. It's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
fatherhood space, but
Yeah.
it's everybody, to your point, who's working with families. Like, if
Yes.
you say you're working with families and you're not working with fathers, then you're not working with families,
Thank you.
right? So when you think about the bridge from the fatherhood stuff, which is the pure fatherhood engagement stuff, moving into, what I am now beginning to shift in my language and not saying relationships anymore and saying co-parenting, because that's what we're talking about. Co-parenting encompasses all of it, whether or not you're
Mm-hmm.
married, you're single, you're resident, you're non-resident, you're custodial, you're non-custodial. Co-parenting still moves and maneuvers through all of that stuff. But how
Yeah.
do we get from, to your point, strengthening fathers to build their capacity to be the best fathers they desire to be, and at the same time becoming effective and productive co-parents? Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about, in your space and the work that you're doing, particularly in the plus side. What
Yeah.
does that look like for you?
Sure. So the first thing that comes up, and you started it with the policy work, right? I sit at tables that are not fairly new because I did it from a different place, but I sit at the child support table now. I sit at the child welfare. I sit in the education space, and not just saying y'all need to treat dads or y'all need to engage them. We need to change policy on how fathers are engaged. Because if you're saying they're important, then we can't have, and I'll just use the school for example, we can't have every meeting at the school at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday.
Mm,
The policy needs to change that the meetings need to be held at time where dads are available if you say they're important, right? So I sit at the table and I get to say that, and and fortunately, as a good plus employee, with a very supportive board and a board chair, Jessica, who ain't playing. Right, our words are intentional and unapologetic. We're not beholden to a grant, so I get to be real,
mhm,
unapologetic, and intentional about the engagement. So I sit at child welfare saying, y'all ain't doing it right, and let me show you how. Not just you're not doing it right. Let me show you how and provide tools. So, and I'll just give an example. In Los Angeles, every single social worker now has to have father engagement before they have a caseload. That wasn't the same before we were engaged with them 5 years ago. People got
mhm,
a caseload. So the policy has changed that you have to have father engagement now. And so we talk about in that training bias, not in a negative finger pointing way. So we're starting to change the engagement with individuals. Um, I will say that it's a little challenging because a lot of people are used to working with people in the fatherhood space that won't say certain things in fear of being blackballed,
mm,
right?
mhm,
Who are in fear of you're not going to get the next grant if you. I'm known as the guy who will say it in the room, right? I
mhm,
really am, and I'm not saying
mhm,
that from a big bad Alan Michaels place, but I'm so intentional about the advancement of things for my people, and I'm not talking about just black people, and I'm talking about just fathers, families. I'm
mhm,
so intentional and committed to making sure that we improve those outcomes that I am one of the ones, and my board and my bosses they let me navigate that space, right? And it's different space. I don't see a lot of people in it because we work for things that, you know, we have to be careful because the next round of funding's coming out, and we don't want to get, I'm keeping it real. I don't have to work in that space. So I get to say, this don't make sense, y'all. You and I were at a child support thing recently. And when we were in DC, and I was sitting at the table.
Right.
This is what we still talking about?
Yeah.
We need to move the work, right? So I don't know if I answered your question.
Nah, you good. You rolling. You hitting the bullseyes on everything.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, you know, there is so much of that. And it's, you know, I'm writing this book. This is off, and then I'm gonna come back.
Okay.
But I'm writing this book now. I'm writing 2 memoirs. I'm writing the memoir, Echoes of My Father, which is the one that I talked about earlier. But I'm writing a second one that I'm actually a little more deep into now because this conversation is part of that. And it's called Too Old to Care. Why I Don't Give a F About What You Think About Me. And it's a book on aging in the sense that when you become more deeply committed to your passion and purpose, you stop caring about how people think about you, and you stop caring so much about what you think you can lose by doing the right thing. And so you become more bold and challenging the status quo. And I'm in that space right now. And I'm like, you know, I'm trying not to be a bull in a china case, but I am trying to be a disruptor in the space, which is no, we're not going to continue to have these conversations in this manner. Things have got to change, and they've got to change immediately and drastically in these spaces, right? And one of the spaces is, as you talk about working with social workers, is the disparity between the amounts of women who are in the social work space and men in the social work space, which is a huge, huge challenge and a whole nother space that we got to dig in and figure out how we make those happen, how we make that happen. What are the areas of this work that
Can I just add to what you just said really quick? Because you just said something that was a mic drop thing. We have to change it. I just sat in with a social worker working with a father recently because I do a lot of on the ground work in LA. And I heard a social worker with lots of experience say, well, Dr. Graves, this father doesn't work. What's his value to the family? I almost fell out of my chair. I'm like, are you saying that because he doesn't have a job, he has no value to his children and his family? What if they have decided that mom who's got the degrees is going to go to work and he's going to stay with the babies? Your stuff is now being put on this family in a way that they can't make it because you're saying he has no value. So to your point, there's some education that needs to be done around. I guess the disruptor thing really got to me because you're right. That's exactly what I need to be. And not in I want to be an angry black man way. Right. I want to do it through a Dr. Graves intelligent way, but I can't just accept you saying this man has no value. Oh no, we got some work to do. We can't stop there, right? I'm sorry that you.
No.
You poked the bear.
Because we've been in those rooms together. Yes. We've been like the 2 rooms that I remember very, vividly is the room that we were in LA with Equimundo talking about male caregivers.
Yes.
And we're sitting in that room and they're talking about fathers as allies. And remember I said, I have a problem with the word allies.
Right.
I said, because ally means I take up your cause, but you don't have any concern for mine.
That's right.
I'm not interested in one more ally. I need partners.
Yep.
When we partner, I have concern for yours and you have concern for mine. So if it's allies you want, I'm not it. And so, because I don't have room for nobody else's cause, right? Yes. If we're moving in the same direction, we can do all things at the same time. And so that is one of those areas that I've been, pressing, really, really hard as well. And then I think the other room we was in was a child support room, where they're talking about, the name change. But I've heard Commissioner Gray, talk about this, and we've had some conversations on the side about it. And I got it from her perspective. I didn't get it from mine, but I got it from hers. And what she was saying is, Kenny, we got to start somewhere. Like this may to you are 1000% right in your assertion that this doesn't change things,
Right.
but it has to start somewhere. If I could get people to grasp this concept, I could get them to grasp the next concept and then the next one, and then we can get them convinced, and then we can actually get some stuff moving. So in my disruptor role, sometimes there are people that God puts in my life that slow down a little bit. Like, I know,
Same
dude,
here.
I'm like, you ready
Yes.
to come in and like, blast the whole place up. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
nah, we gotta be cool a little bit and we
Yep.
got to do some things differently.
I love that.
But the social worker piece is something else that kind of drives me crazy a little bit.
So
Outside of
Kenny,
those,
so Kenny, I think that that's important too. I mean, in the conversation, because you just helped me. I promise you have just now, because I now see it a little differently. Because I tell people all the time, every child support presentation I've been to in the last year, that's been the focus, the name change.
right,
I'm like, okay, the name change. And what else, right? We can't just say that our major accomplishment the last year and a half, 18 months is the name change, right?
right,
There has to be the next step. But because you said it in the way that you did, and this is why I think partnerships are important, I'm going to show at the table a little bit different, saying that this is their start at
right,
something new. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you,
Right.
sir.
Because of the shift in people. Remember, I said that.
Yeah.
You're
Yep.
talking about a whole new room of people. You got these young researchers that are walking into the room. You got these young social workers that are coming into the room. You got these young people. And by the way, they don't look like us. By the way, right? So we got this whole other thing back here that we got to deal with at the same time. That's why I'm so adamant about the infrastructure piece, because the principles got to be in place to be able to deal with this thing on different levels and different spaces. And it can't just be you and I and a few other people. And part of what gives us the ability to do that is our independence, in a way where we're
Yeah.
not depending on people to fund my. David Miller says this to me all the time: fund your own freedom.
Yeah.
Right? But do it off the back of the value that you bring to the work. Because once you become unexpendable, people got to have you in the space, right? So
So
you always got to bring your value.
can I ask you a question? What did
Sure.
you mean when they don't look like us?
They not from the hood.
Okay. All right.
They
Because
not from they're not from the communities that are impacted the most by the lack of empathy
mm-hmm.
for the people who are being impacted.
Yeah.
And so it starts with, I have no empathy for men, and I have even less empathy for Black men.
Yeah.
But you forget that Black men are attached to Black women who are attached to
The black
Black
babies.
children.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yeah.
you can't disconnect one. That's been the script for 400 years,
Yeah.
right? And
That's
and
why
what
I
drives.
asked.
And so I'm trying to, with you and I'm trying to stay in this space
Mm-hmm.
where we remain. So people, I saw this the other day, Dr. Graves. I got to find my phone real quick, and so I can read it. This guy, Lugo, can't think of his name. So there's a lot of conversation right now on LinkedIn between Richard Reeves, who's with the Boys Institute,
Mm-hmm.
and Ugo, that's talking about masculinity right now. And there was a guy who posted something talking about a post that Lugo had um, put out there, and he was basically challenging him on what he was posting. And man, he wrote this line, and I was like, "Yo, that is the best line I've read anywhere in a long time." This is what he said. He said, "With such a sensitive subject, everything matters. How you say it and when you say it matters as much, maybe more, than the message itself if you want it to land effectively."
Yes.
Man, you talk about a shock to I was like, okay, Braswell, it's a time and a place. There's a tone, there's an intention, there's an emotion, all these things that come into play. And only cooler heads prevail when it comes to being able to manage this conversation, which now walks me into what we're looking at now with respect to um, the policies specifically around, because this was the other room that we were in at the dad's call,
Mhm.
which is, where we're sitting there and the tone, and this is what Richard and Lugo are actually talking about right now and focusing on. And I'm seeing other men begin to start to pipe in this space now as it relates to uh, maternal health care, child tax credits, and maternity health, and having men advocate for those policies. And the reality being, absolutely, we should be advocating for policies that protect our mothers and our women and our girls in our lives.
Mhm.
But that can't be at the expense of my own health. Somebody's got to be concerned about
Look at me.
mine, right? About me. And that stuff has to be in the same room.
Yep.
So if we are having a conversation within the context of a dad's caucus, you have to show to me what's in it for me specifically. I understand and I get the other stuff because, like you said in the beginning, and like is my experience, I have a mother. So, absolutely, I want that to move. I have aunties. Absolutely, I want that to move. I have daughters. Absolutely, I want that to move. I have aunties and friends who are women and good friends who are mothers. Absolutely, I want all that to do. But none of those people I just described want their benefits to be in replacement of mine, if that makes sense.
No,
So,
total
in the
sense.
space now, when you're dealing in the policy space, how difficult is it now to continue to uplift the conversation around specifically fathers when there's such a high demand on fathers being advocates for others?
So I'm going to answer that, but I just want to backtrack to something that you said, right? Or I asked you around what you meant by it. And it was
Mm,
intentional because even in the last summit, at the very beginning, I can't remember his name, the head guy. I can't remember his name.
Steph Chamberlain.
No,
Oh, Jeff Help.
yes.
Yes.
Jeff said in his opening, we got to talk about race, y'all. We have to
Mm,
deal with race. And I was super excited. Asked people at my table, I was like, yes, I have not heard that from the
mm,
head. I was super
right,
excited. I didn't get it again the entire conference.
right.
I did not. I sat in multiple sessions and nobody highlighted the need to be intentional about who we were talking about, whether it be I saw it like when you did the campfire, you had the
Hmm.
other rates, but nobody pointed out the specifics to me that really told people from the policy standpoint. Now, and I get around the country now, there's so many political things around race, but if we're talking about fatherhoods, and I do work with fatherhood programs across the country, the majority of them are of color, right?
Yes.
And so if we're not talking about them of color in a very intentional way, I'm not talking about glossing over it. I'm talking about real conversation because I hear people even when they talk about me, I just see you as a doctor. I just see you as a good father. No, you need to see me as a good black doctor and a good black daddy because there are
Right.
some things that come with that. And if Kenny, you don't get that or that's not factored into how you approach me, you can't help me because
Right.
I wake up like this all day, every day. My fatherhood is rooted in it. When I take my
Yeah.
babies to school, I'm not just a father in some of the spaces. I'm a black father, right? My show up is different.
Right.
I might raise my voice a little different. I might walk. I might stand. So you got to understand that, so you don't make me the bad guy. So for me, the intentionality in these spaces, you were right when you said, and I love the quote. I got to be able to introduce the topic of culture and race at the right time, and it can't be just about the message, right? And I can't come in there screaming and hollering because I am going to be seen as the angry black man, right?
Right.
So
Right.
intentionally, I have to introduce this conversation, and that's my challenge right now. Because when
Mm-hmm.
I show up, and you see now on the screen with my passion in my hands and how I move, some people are like, wait a minute, you're a little too intense, sir.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just passionate about changing my community,
Mm-hmm.
literally. And I know that our communities are not going to change unless we engage our men. And I'm not talking about just Black. I'm talking about, because 80% of my clients are Latino. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about men, period. Unless we engage them where they are and take into consideration how they show up, from the cultures that they show up, all this is for nothing. It's my true belief. And I know that in order to change the communities, we have to address your Blackness, your Latino-ness, your Native Americanness in the conversation of improving the outcomes of kids, right?
Yeah, you weren't at the HMRF had a conference for the grantees.
Yeah, I
Um,
wasn't invited.
oh, listen, I'm gonna send you a link to Dr. Clinton Boyd's presentation.
Please
Man,
do.
that young brother is fire. And
Okay.
he, everything that you just said, he did it perfectly. I'm gonna send you the link because
Good.
they just dropped it the other day,
Okay.
and take a
Cool.
listen to it.
I appreciate that.
It is phenomenal. And he did exactly. And it, you talking about uncomfortability, if that's the word,
Hmm.
in that room with him bringing race as a factor into the space of responsible fatherhood and relationships. That thing was, it was you. I mean, you could look around the room and you could see in people's faces that they were just, but you gotta have the conversation.
Yeah.
You gotta have it. We gotta get past this uncomfortable feeling about it.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere. Like it's gotta be dealt with. When you look at your work, what frustrates you the most day to day?
That there's not, and it goes back to where there's just not enough of us doing it to have the impact that we want, is what frustrates me, right? There's 5 of us, 6 of us, right? That are doing it for the right reason. And we're stretched thin. Like I left last night, or actually less than 24 hours, I was in North Carolina advocating for fathers through child welfare, right? I was in the
Mhm.
storm trying to get back here today so I can do this. And tomorrow I'll be hitting in the plane, getting back to LA to make sure that I'm there for the 3-day father engaged. The frustrating part is that I just don't have enough time to do
Mm,
a lot of what I think needs to be done just by me, right? And there are not a
mhm.
lot of spaces because most programs have one fatherhood person, right?
Right.
He's our fatherhood coordinator, right? Um, we can't do it yet. I mean, if you got an agency with 800 employees and you only got one little father coordinator, there's
Right.
a problem, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's my frustration, is that we don't have the resources, and I'm not talking about the curriculum. I'm talking about the bodies to do the work, and there's just it's placed on a few of us.
Yeah.
And the other frustration is that the few of us are pitted against each other. That's a whole
Mm,
nother. We'll have a whole nother. I hope you invite me back because I'd love to talk
absolutely.
about that,
Yeah.
because I work with fatherhood programs, and because I'm not a grantee and I don't want to be a grantee, but I see it that they don't share information with each other. I know you guys got that, but I can't, because then you're going to be more um, look better or favorable with the grant than I am. But that means that we're missing something in our. So that's the other frustration, that there's not a lot of spaces. And the summit reminded me of it, where we're
Mhm,
really sharing information, good information, to help each other do better in this space. And
mhm.
because we're pitted against each other. And I even heard people, when they were asking Seth about the grant, some people were whispering, "Don't ask that in public. Let's ask him separately." I'm like, ask him out loud so everybody gets it, right?
Right.
But that's the other frustration, right? That it's dog eat dog, right? Crabs
Yeah.
in a barrel.
Right, absolutely. And it's crazy because there's yeah, we definitely gonna come back and talk about that separately because that's a longer, deeper conversation. But I know I've even had to evolve in that space
Yeah.
because I'm also in a different space too. My space is a little different than anybody else's space because part of where Fathers Incorporated is in. So the grant space is one thing, the contract space is another thing.
Yeah.
And there is a level of guardedness that you have to have
I hear you.
in order to maintain like your positioning for the work. Like I truly believe, like God told me, listen, 8, 9 years ago, he's like, this is yours to give away. He was like, this is yours to give away. Until you don't want it, you're going to have it. And every year I come up with another reason why this work, particularly with the clearinghouse,
Mm-hmm.
is so critical
Yeah.
to the masses, right? That in other hands, it would just be a check the box.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that, and I too. You know, I'm a presenter. At a universities. I don't give out my PowerPoints
Right.
for good reason, but I don't let it affect or say that at the risk of families. That's where I would get worried about, right?
Yes,
The
yes,
people
yes,
who
yes.
are blocking their stuff and
Yeah.
they know it's hurting families, right?
Right, 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 right.
So I
Yeah,
get you. You got to protect
yeah.
your stuff because
Right,
we do got I do got to feed my kids, right? So
right.
I'm not sending you my whole PowerPoint so that you don't need me anymore, and I don't. But I'm also going to help you do whatever you need to do in your space to make sure families are a little different, right?
Right. And I don't know if you're seeing what I'm seeing in the TA space. I know when I go out and people call me to come and do TA for them, that, people think it's an infrastructure issue a lot of times, and it's
Yeah.
not. It's a culture
Right.
issue.
Yep.
It's like you don't understand who you're dealing with.
Yep.
And like y'all wrote a great grant and y'all getting all this money and y'all had all these assumptions based on research that this would work, that would work, and this is work, and they ain't none of it working.
Because you ain't
Because
had that
you
conversation.
and now you're on the
Culturally.
struggle bus. For me, that is the tragedy
Yeah.
of the work when an organization is getting millions upon millions of dollars and they're failing when other organizations could be getting that money and doing an incredible job with it. Because whenever an organization is failing, to me, families are left on the ground. That's how I
Yeah.
see it.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. And that's what frustrates me about
Yeah.
that
I
piece,
like that.
right? And that there has to be more accountability on who you are providing grants. Now, I know to a certain extent the federal government doesn't have the uh,
Ability.
priority
Mm-hmm.
of building the infrastructure like we talked about in the beginning. They're just trying to deal with the issue at hand. But to your point about the policy thing, that is where we're coming in saying,
Yes.
no, the intentionality of how you are moving this money has to be such that it's supporting the network of people around the country who are
Yes.
trying to have real impact on the ground in communities that are desperately in need. That was my litmus test going through COVID, the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
where I said to people, like, my greatest across my life accomplishment as a CEO was that Fathers Incorporated doubled in size during the pandemic, not disappeared,
Gotcha.
because that said that I showed up at the time that people needed me the most.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I gotta be thinking. I gotta be thinking that the infrastructure of the organization has to be there when people are at their most desperate times. I can't be desperate along with desperate people. That
I got
can't,
you. I
right?
got you.
That
Yeah.
can't happen. And I think that there's a conversation that we got to have with everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's a conversation that we got to have with us, right? Because that conversation looks a little different
Yeah.
when we start having to have it with us. Here's the next thing I got for you.
Sure.
And so, what's a good day for you? Like, what do you do in a day where you come into the house and you're like, you know what, Dr. Graves, today was a good day. This was
Oh,
good.
that's it's easy but complex, right? Because I do the macro work a lot across the country, but so that I stay in tune, I also do. I still facilitate 2 parenting classes
Uh-huh.
a week. I do 2 domestic violence class. I have one right after this, a domestic violence class. So I'm on the ground with the people that we're really talking about. I don't
Uh-huh.
sit in an office and say this is what we should do. I know what they're talking about. I know the
Right.
struggles they're going through. And a good day is when a father gets on and he say, "Hey fellas, I just want to tell y'all I got my reunification. I moved to overnights. I got 50-50 custody. I get through, even through all the crap that I didn't know and did wrong, with the tools that we've got here together, guys. I'm seeing my babies more often. That's a good day for me, to be perfectly honest with you. If a guy logs on because I start with roses and thorns every day, right? Just
Mm.
giving them a space to complain if they need to, but also tell the good stuff. When the guy gives us a rose that he's reunified or got to spend more time with his kids, it's all worth it for me. That recharges me for the next day. Because I told you I get tired, right? Because it's
Yeah,
only a
yeah,
few
yeah.
days to it, but that recharges me like nothing else.
Yeah, you and I have the same great days. Like I
Okay.
had one the other day, and brother, because one of our staff people, we got a relationship now with one of the counties here, and then chief magistrate judges, and she was like, "I need you in my courtroom once a week. Y'all pick a day. I don't care how I just need y'all in the courtroom once a week." And so we picked a day, and so I got a staff person that literally goes and just
Love
there in
it.
the courtroom, and what he is like a rover, right? And so whatever he sees is happening, he's trying to
Yeah.
intervene and help people with their attitudes and their emotions and all that stuff.
Stress, all of it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So last week, he had this past week, he sent me a picture, and then he sent me a text of the brother that he was talking to, and this is what the text said. The text says, "Thanks, bro. Barely made it out of there." And then Keith's response back to him was, "Yeah, I thought she had you. Glad you get to sleep in your own bed tonight. We're gonna make sure we have a solid plan moving forward. Just make sure you stay connected with us." And he said, "Yes, sir." This was a dude that they was about to put the handcuffs on and take him to the back. And if it wasn't for Keith intervening and saying, "Yo, this is not how you want to approach this conversation. This is what you want to be able to do." Like that's the intangible thing that people just don't get. Like the hands-on being on the ground. You're like me. I have to force myself sometimes from not being on the ground. I'm like, so Keith was like, I'm like, "Yo, Keith, I'm coming down this Wednesday." He was like, "No." I'm like, I need to be I need to be blanketed in that feeling. I need to see that this work that we're doing is impacting people on the ground. Forget the outcomes and the outputs and the numbers and inform and the research and the Mathematica and the MDRC and the urban, all these reports. Forget all that stuff. I need to be on the ground and I need to see pure evidence that people are being impacted by what we're trying to accomplish, and at the same time learn from the ones who are slipping through, because on that same day he got through but two got locked up. And it's like, okay, we'll wait for them because we'll be here when they get out, and maybe this is what they needed to listen. But we'll see him in the cohort. That's like no need for mandatory, no need to send guys to us mandatory. We told him, it's like, we don't need you to send. First of all, from federal grant, we can't take anybody, man. We strongly suggest it, but not mandatory. Now with other spaces, we could take them in. I said, but we don't need that at all. You do your job and trust me. We know with all these guys who come through us. Nah, I don't really need this right now, bro. I'm good, blah blah blah. I'm like, all right, you know what? If you they go, something's gonna push them up against the wall, and they're gonna be back. Trust me. Yeah, yeah. The other one too is, when we do our graduations, because one of these days I'm gonna get you down to come and speak to one of our graduating classes. One of the things that we're seeing is that when we first started doing these things, now it's almost 4.5 years ago, we always had more fathers at the graduation than families. Now we have almost three times as many family members there as dads. And so we have 50 fathers going through the cohort of that. There's 150 family members there. And as we look at our pictures, we're beginning to see more and more fathers who are bringing their children to the graduation, right? And like every time I see one of those pictures, I'm like, yo, this is the narrative that you are setting for your child, no matter how your relationship turns out. Because if it turns out great, you'll be able to show this is where it started. This is where I made an intentional action to be a better father. And this was the event. And so you got this picture, and his son is asleep, knocked out on his, whatever, or they running or doing whatever. I said, because the other narrative, and we always talk to them about this when they first come into the class. I have a video that they watch, where I talk about, listen, the one thing that you don't want is you don't want your child to meet me in 10 years and ask me whatever happened to my dad in that fatherhood program that he said. And I say to your child, oh, he thought that whatever he had was going on in his life, it was not, he was too busy. He didn't have time for the class. I said, you don't want me to tell your child that. And I will, if that's how you leave. And we got the records, so we know what you did. And so I won't be lying in it. We'll go back and I say, oh, look up, John Doe from 19, blah, blah, blah. What happened to him again? Oh, he never showed up. He didn't call us back. He didn't text us back. Oh, you know what? Oh, here's your dad. He could have had something going on in his life, but based on our notes, like, he just never showed up. And you got to answer for that. You don't want that. You want to be all in when it comes to that. Davin always tells me, he's like, yo, man, he's like that. He says, when you created that and started putting that out there in the space, he's like, these cats coming through at 100% right now where they're not missing one. He said, I think that was the thing that like really awakened them in their mind. And he said, primarily because I think it reactivates something with respect to the relationship with their own fathers. Right? Which is, if they ask them the same question, would they give me an answer that justifies their absence?
Yeah.
Right? And that's sort of, yeah, but that's, to me, it's like, my thing is, I'm a body puncher. I'm like, I'm not going for your head. I want to knock the breath out you. I'm gonna leave your head alone because I want you thinking. Like, I don't want to knock your noodles crazy. I want to hit you in the gut and take your breath away, right? And so you can still think about not being able to breathe right now. Because that's what happens when we break up with girlfriends, right? Our brain is like going crazy because we can't breathe. Our stomach is always the thing that we try to get right. But I think as men who've gone through the experiences that you and I have gone through gives us the advantage. And how do you convince and motivate fathers to stay in the game and do this thing? Because we've seen some things and we know some things. And that has just been the joy, of my work. And it's what keeps me moving every day and keeps me motivated to be a disruptor. Because it's not about, the hordes or the scales of people that we can deal with. It's just about that one cat that I need to change, because we don't know who he's raising, right? He could be raising the next Barack Obama, Muhammad Ali, Steve, LeBron James, whatever. We don't know who he's raising. And so if I could get him right, I could be getting the child right to be the miracle that his child is going to be, for society.
That's the change in the community. Exactly what you just said, right? I'm changing the community through that dad, because we don't know who that's maybe the next city councilman.
Right.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell people how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you and the Good Plus Foundation.
So again, I'm with the Good Plus Foundation. I serve as the Senior Director of Training, Capacity Building, and now Policy Change. Alan Michael at goodplusfoundation.org is my email address. The best way to get a hold of me, because I travel so much. Goodplusfoundation.org is our website, and you can get more information on the training that we do and or our intentional message around intentional father engagement, right? We want to make this incentive fatherhood model spread across the country. Not that other people aren't doing it right, but looking at it differently, that we can help families come out of poverty by helping them do something for themselves, right? So if I can help you be motivated of getting through a DB class, that's better for your family, right? Because you have some tools now, as opposed to just giving you something and then you needed it again tomorrow, right? Yeah, that's how to get a hold of me.
Okay, man. Thank you, brother. Listen, love everything about you. And as my good friend and board chair, Dr. Ferguson always says, I love you, and there's absolutely nothing you could do about it. And so, um,
Let's feel that. I like that.
listen, we definitely coming back.
Okay.
This is why I wanted you, because I
Okay.
knew that
Yeah.
the jewels that you have, the experiences that you have, and the perspective that you have on this work is different, but it's critical for others to be inspired by. I think that's the biggest compliment that I get about I Am Dad podcast is when people say, "Man, I heard the interview last week. Man, that thing did something to me. It just inspired me to do something else." And again, like we talked earlier, this is just a start. We still got to do other things that inspire people, to do more. And I think success is one of the biggest motivators of inspiring people to do more. So I appreciate you, man.
I appreciate you. I thank you for the invite. I look at us both as servant leaders, right, in
Mm,
this space, right? Not for fame or glory, but this is what we're supposed to be doing. So I love riding with people who have the same mindset. Thank
Thank
you.
you. And to my I Am Dad podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode. You know how I like to leave you. Always be kind to others as you're kind to yourself, or you might find yourself by yourself. Always shoot high for your goals, because even if you miss, you'll be amongst the stars. And as my good friend and mentor, Art Mitchell, used to always say to me, it's nice to be important, but you know what? It's much more important to be nice. Till next Sunday, peace out.
Thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us. You've been listening to I Am Dad podcast. We hope that you have been informed, encouraged you to think, or even inspired your heart for the love of dads. The conversation does not end here. Come back and join us next week. Same time, same place. Or you can continue the dialogue on our I Am Dad Facebook page. We also invite you to listen to past episodes, learn more about us, and keep up with special activities by visiting iamdadpodcast.com. That's iamdadpodcast.com. Until next time, I leave you with this reminder of manhood from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Because of this reminder, I will always understand that I am dad, period.